The incredible world of Arda holds a vast array of incredible and mysterious characters, creatures, evils and heroes over the course of its many ages. From the most ancient times of the Valar to the more recent events of the Lord of the Rings, there are a great deal of incredible and noble characters throughout the archives of history, and no more so than Aragorn Elessar, Isildur's heir and later the High King of Gondor, after the powers of the West triumphed over the evil region of Mordor in the War of the Ring. However, for most, Aragorn's past prior to the War of the Ring is shrouded in mystery, and so we'll delve deep into his travels before the events of the War of the Ring and the film adaptations. Greetings all, I'm your guide, the Archivist. Today I'm going to cover Aragorn's mysterious past, who he really is and his upbringing, as well as what led him to be in during the events of the War of the Ring. Heritage and descent. Aragorn's heritage is often one of the most surprising secrets to most, as in the film adaptations, his origins and lineage are not often touched upon whatsoever during the time of the War of the Ring in that setting. However, Aragorn is descendant of Elros Tar Miniatur, who is the brother of Elrond, making his heritage half-elven and thus longer in life. Elros was given a choice by the Valar whether to take a human or elf life, and he chose the former, being prepared as the first king of Númenor, whilst Elrond chose the life of an elf, and therefore life everlasting without taint. This explains Aragorn's long-lived appearance in the works of Tolkien, and is his interesting relationship with Elrond, who is family to him in many ways. His ancestor Arvedui was also wedded to Firiel, descendant of Anarion, Aranarth, making Aragorn the last descendant of both Isildur and Anarion, and therefore the rightful heir to the entire lands of the West, Arnor and Gondor. Because of this, he was ideally placed to take on the mantle of defending the West and ultimately defeating Sauron, uniting the entirety of the West against him, and justly as a result. Early years. Aragorn's childhood was a fitful affair, with many terrible events befalling him at an early age. When he was only 2 years old, his father Arathorn was killed while fighting and pursuing a band of orcs, and after this Elrond took Aragorn and secreted him away in Rivendell. The line of Aragorns Elrond knew to be of great importance as a member of Elrond's kindred, and his mother requested his lineage now be kept a secret for fear of him being hunted all his life and killed by orcs in an attempt to sow more sorrow on the houses of the men of the West. If his true identity as a house of Elendil and heir of Isildur would have become known, he likely would have been heavily targeted by the forces of darkness. Aragorn bore the elven name Estel at this time, and his lineage was kept a secret from him until a later date. Legacy. Aragorn would not learn of his true legacy until he was 20 and already a man, and during his childhood he became a great friend to the elves as well as to Elrond's sons Elladan and Elrohir, who treated him like one of their own. After Elrond came to Aragorn to tell him of his true heritage and rightful place in the world, he bestowed on him the artifacts of his house, the Ring of Barahir, and the shards of Narsil which would become the reforged Flame of the West during the beginning of the War of the Ring against Sauron. During this time, Aragorn also met Arwen for the first time during his youthful prime, and fell deeply in love with her, though their love was a cursed thing that would be destroyed by time. She returned to Rivendell during this time from a long trip to Lothlorien, where she had been visiting with her mother's family home, including Galadriel, who was her grandmother. Upon his realization of his place in the world, and with a new sense of purpose at the thought of his birthright, Aragorn struck out into the world and became the 16th chieftain of the Dunedain and left Rivendell behind, hoping to forge a path forward for his newfound kin. He lived with them as a ranger of the north, and only few of them remained now after the terrible devastation that had been visited on Arnor centuries before by the Witch King of Angmar during the Angmar Wars centuries in the past. Because of this, the people were scattered and fearful for their future, and Aragorn did his best to steal and resolve them of their purpose and place in the world, and that they would rebuild. Stride of the Journeyman. At around this time, Aragorn met Gandalf the Grey for the first time, and they quickly became great friends. Gandalf quickly taught Aragorn much of the world in their short time together in this period, and Gandalf also advised Aragorn and the Rangers to take up residence and guard the Shire, inhabited by the hobbits, after which he took on his first moniker, and one heard during the film adaptations, Strider. After this point for around 20 years, Aragorn journeyed around the land and started to create a legacy for himself with the peoples of the world. He served in the armies of the Men of the West, including for Ecthelion II of Gondor and for Thengel of Rohan, helping to bolster the resolve of the Men of the West against the growing incursions of Sauron and the allies of the Dark Lord. The morale of the West grew greatly during this time, and his experience with war and with life grew exponentially with his wisdom of life from the elves and his gift of foresight from the Dunedain. He fought in many great campaigns during this time, and whispers of him began to grow throughout the lands. Aragorn served these lords in disguise, and his name in Gondor and Rohan during that time was Thorongil, meaning Eagle of the Star in Elvish. He also led a successful campaign against the Corsairs of Umbar, a long-standing rival and thorn in the side of Gondor, killing their lord himself and claiming a great victory as their leader. He travelled again east after this, leaving a lingering question of his true identity with his comrades who had fought with him during these periods. The love of Arwen. At this time he returned to a realm of the elves, Lothlorien, and met Arwen there. He had returned a man of great power and wisdom, seeing many battles and learning much of the world and himself. Whilst Arwen was well over 2,000 years old by this point in her life, she loved him dearly, and he gave her the heirloom of his house, the Ring of Badahir, and she pledged him her hand in marriage as a result. On the hill of Cerin Amroth, she renounced her elvish descent and accepted what Aragorn's great ancestor had accepted so long ago, the gift of men, death. Elrond was understandably unsure about this, and withheld from Aragorn the permission to marry his daughter at that time. The sense of grief that Elrond must have felt at this news must have felt very melancholy for him, potentially losing his daughter to the shrouds of time, whilst he would live on everlasting. This fate was also chosen by his brother and Aragorn's descendant, and must have given him much conflict at the prospect. He said he would withhold permission until such a time as he would become king of both Gondor and Arnor and fulfill his birthright. Both knew that to marry Aragorn, Arwen would choose mortality and ultimately a life filled with death. Elrond would live on whilst the world remained, whilst Arwen and Aragorn would perish. Elrond was not foolish, and was also scared for Arwen's happiness in a world where she and her beloved would both ultimately die. Foreshadowing on the land. With all this to consider, Aragorn again struck out into the world before the events of The Hobbit and The Lord of the Rings began to take place, journeying to Moria and to Harad, where the stars were strange. Little is known of what transpired during this period of around 20 to 30 years, but Aragorn would likely return with more wisdom and experience he would use in the years that followed during the beginning of the War of the Ring. Sometime later, Gandalf met with Aragorn after his suspicions being aroused about the ring that Bilbo Baggins had found, which eventually turned out to be the One Ring of Sauron. Aragorn's rangers watched the Shire whilst Aragorn struck out into Rhovanion and tracked down Gollum, who he knew had possessed the ring for some time and been corrupted by its power. After catching Gollum in the Dead Marshes, he brought them to Thranduil's halls in Mirkwood, and he was questioned by the forces of good, but then again escaped after an orc attack on the region. The War of the Ring. Aragorn went his separate ways at this time from Gandalf, but once Gandalf found that the Nazgûl were seeking the hobbits, he went to Bree and lay in wait for them to come to the Prancing Pony, where he met them as Strider and joined the story of the War of the Ring, and in the film adaptations. Beyond this, the story is well documented, and ultimately Aragorn's heritage was realised. He married Arwen and became the king of all men in the West, as was his birthright. And so I have now covered the content of this video, but if there's anything that has been missed, please share them in the comments down below. If you enjoyed this content, please remember to like the subscribe and like waystones down below. Na luig o Vanadvan. Until we meet again.